Welcome. Welcome to the Ask Nato channel. Welcome if you're watching from the Facebook group. Welcome no matter who you are. We're here to talk about DevSecOps today because that's something that I do pretty much all the time. So, DevSecOps. DevSecOps is something that we use to run our business, something that we deliver to our clients, something that I have been doing pretty much since I started working with continuous technologies, aka cybersecurity, basically. Doing cybersecurity research, all of these different things. And the skill that I have used to basically just carry my career in the direction that it's ended up in is what ultimately became DevSecOps, because when I started doing all of this stuff, you know, there's been DevOps and stuff like that, but I did more like security related things and other stuff. But DevSecOps and DevOps are kind of the same thing in some ways. You could argue that. There's debates. We don't need to get into some of the little granular things. I'm here to talk to people who don't know what this is at all. So, if you've never heard of DevSecOps, that stands for Development Security Operations. And this has to do with basically development, so software development, technology, stuff like that, developing technology, and alternatively, operations engineering. So operations engineering has to do with, you know, the operations of a business. A business must operate on a day-to-day basis. If a business is running servers, running data centers, and they have day-to-day operations, this includes things like maintaining infrastructure, updating infrastructure, managing the security of the infrastructure. And when we really start to get into the focus of secure development for operations, that's DevSecOps. And so I've pretty much spent my career around understanding the secure implementation of software, the things that make it vulnerable. So if you have vulnerable software, how can you deploy vulnerable software in a way that's either less vulnerable or protected or monitored? And then, you know, is it worth the risk if there's a risk involved with installing software? It's a philosophy. So DevSecOps is, at the end of the day, a philosophy more or less. And it's really a philosophy around being able to develop things and produce them for operations purposes and use in engineering rapidly, swiftly, and, you know, some might call DevSecOps runs sprints. I used to call DevSecOps sprints. So if anyone's ever worked with me in the past, I'm like, hey, I could teach you how to go through a sprint. A sprint is DevSecOps. And what I mean by this is it's basically like, okay, let's set a goal of something that we're going to create or develop or engineer. We set a goal first, right? And once we have this goal, we set like a timeline, which usually I set my cycles to about 3 months if I'm developing anything. So I'm like, okay, so I want to create something of whatever that I decide, that's my goal, within 3 months, and this thing needs to be able to accomplish X, Y, Z. The first thing that I do is, you go through practices that allow you to do this quickly and rapidly, or conclude that, within your timeline that what you're trying to accomplish is unfortunately not possible, or maybe it is possible. And if it's possible, then you go from developing the item, and, you might start with what's called a proof of concept, is what that's called. So if you have a proof of concept, then that is something to, prove that the idea might work. Then you move on to, okay, so now let's implement that and test the proof of concept. You do those things, you go through your runs. And so then you just basically like build, iterate, improve, and you just keep doing that. You don't stop. And then until ultimately you get into producing a product, or if you're working with an established company, then that might just be like testing updates for a live system. So like, for example, Facebook can't go down. If Facebook went down, well, it can go down, but people would be very angry and it'd be very bad for Facebook. And it's bad for the user base. But even if it's not Facebook, it's any company really who has a continuous network. It'd be LinkedIn, it could be YouTube. If YouTube just suddenly stopped working for 48 hours, people would freak out if YouTube suddenly stopped working for 48 hours. So somehow people have to know how to securely update all of the servers and systems that run YouTube or Facebook constantly and securely. And this is DevSecOps to know how to do this. And so really, if you know DevSecOps, then you can pretty much learn anything in cybersecurity. Ultimately, if you're specialized in DevSecOps, you're more specialized in the building of things and the crafting of things and automation, orchestration, more of those types of things, like the stand-up, the setup, the provisioning. Kind of DevSecOps professionals tend to be better at those things. Alternatively, we have, if you're not DevSecOps, then you might be an analyst. If you're an analyst, you might use DevSecOps or however have you or whatever. So it doesn't mean that all cybersecurity jobs are DevSecOps. If you're an analyst, the professional who does DevSecOps maintains everything for the analyst to be able to do their job. So if someone's an analyst, then maybe this doesn't necessarily benefit them unless they want to basically become more senior, in which if some analyst wants to become more senior, then they have to get involved with the development security operations associated with whatever it is that they're analyzing. So if you want to move from just being an entry level or just an analyst, or even if you wanted your entry level to be DevSecOps, you could go get a QA job, and a QA job is a hop and a skip away from DevSecOps. I never really thought much about it, but I used to do a lot of QA with like beta. So I've done like QA for Final Fantasy 14. I've done QA for like Warframe and, various like video games really, which is probably where I got a lot of that stuff, because they give you specific things to follow, specific things to test, and then you go and, then I did network engineering, and so you kind of take some of those same practices if you're just testing things and doing QA. Honestly, like World of Warcraft has cybersecurity. Any online RPG Final Fantasy 14 had cybersecurity, and I got to work with some of their networking people when I was doing like their testing and stuff like that. So it's, that wasn't like one of my big fancy jobs or anything like that, but how do you get the skill sets? You can work with the folks and learn some of this stuff. So you can build a whole cybersecurity career out of DevSecOps, and it's transferable. So, because then it's basically software engineering to an extent. I'm speaking for a message to beginners. So for anyone who's watching who knows a lot more, I'm not trying to confuse folks. So there's certain things that I'm not going to go too far into details. So I already ranted enough. Let me actually kind of show you a few visuals, because since we do DevSecOps ourselves, and this is something I do day in and day out, I do this all the time. It's just, I guess it's what I did for a living. You do something for a living long enough, and it just kind of becomes part of your routine, and you build habits. So I actually started building a product for my own DevSecOps, and then I realized that other people could use it too. I guess I wasn't building it as a product before. It was just kind of a experiment or a hobby, or just trying to see what I could build. And then it turned out that it was working, and then I started doing tournaments with it, and then I realized I could start building products with it, and I did all of it with a Raspberry Pi. And we built a platform called the Olympiad, which is basically DevSecOps for continuous technologies, especially technologies like SIM and security technologies like SIM. So let's show you our DevSecOps platform for continuous technologies. Let's take a look at this. It's like magic. Rearrange everything. I actually have two cameras. Let me get my mic back. I actually have two cameras and like two setups, just all at the same desk. And I build my continuous technologies, including like the streaming technology. I've been testing my streaming technology for a while. I started testing streaming from a virtual machine. Basically, I have a golden image that I build from. And so one thing that I'm going to say is most of everything that I do starts with the concept of a golden image. And I will let you go and Google golden image and look up what this is. Basically, a golden image, I'll just read this right here. As stated, a golden image is a template for a virtual machine, in which the case, when I use golden images lately, I've been using golden images with containerization instead of virtual machines. But virtual machine, virtual desktop server, or hard disk drive. A golden image may also be referred to as a clone image, master image, or base image. So ultimately, we've created something very specifically designed to allow you to do these things. To basically do golden host engineering, golden image engineering, and using that for DevSecOps, and we do this in a very specific way. So we have used a series of technologies, including Raspberry Pi and all of that, to create what is called the Olympiad. So this is our first original prototype of the Olympiad. As we speak, we are doing all kinds of revisions of the Olympiad and like different types of casings for it and designs and all that fun stuff, because we are an R&D business. That's what we do. We do research and development all day. And that's just something that I've done throughout my entire career, is R&D for cybersecurity. It's just a thing that I do and have done. So if we take a look at the hardware of the Olympiad, just kind of looking at it at a glance, basically this is a technology. We run this off of solid state drives for the operating system. It's a little tiny computer. So this right here is a solid state hard drive. For those who aren't technical, this is a little tiny computer, and this is the drive that shows the data. If you've ever used an external hard drive, that's the same thing. Or, computers all have hard drives for those who aren't quite familiar with technology and hardware and all those good things. But if we look under the hood in this Olympiad architecture, our system, we use a really robust cooling solution. So for anyone who is technical and knows that when you have something this small that's supposed to output a lot of power, this is actually a Raspberry Pi, and we overclock that Raspberry Pi, very specifically tune it to run at least 25% faster than it's supposed to run out of the box. And we engineer this to run stably in our platform so that basically you can use a Raspberry Pi for full-on DevSecOps. This one's designed for, using power over an Ethernet cable. So to power this thing and everything, you just pop an Ethernet cable in. It doesn't need a normal power plug like what most people with a Raspberry Pi might see. So if you've used a Raspberry Pi, if you don't know what power over Ethernet is, it means that you don't need to use the little USB power plug. You instead power the Raspberry Pi with an Ethernet plug, which is a little internet cable for those who don't necessarily know what an Ethernet plug is, because we get all kinds of viewers. So, different viewers. Some people are just getting started with this stuff. Some people have been working with technology for a while. And then we will use Noctua fans, because Noctua fans are quiet. So this is a Raspberry Pi. It's cooled by Noctua. It has a heat sink that's quite literally the size of the Raspberry Pi. And it blows the thermals upwards. So basically you can crank up the power and speed ratings of the Raspberry Pi. You can overvolt it and everything with this little kit that we've put together. So we overvolt our systems, and then we overclock our systems, and then that gives us enough juice to basically do full-on golden image engineering for development security operations, where basically we create what are called Docker container images to do this. So this is a lightweight sort of an introduction to the concept of infrastructure as code and security as code. So if anyone's ever heard of infrastructure as code, that's basically where you have a whole lot of code that lets you spit out specific architectures on hardware or in containers or in virtual machines. But essentially, it's a code stored in a golden image. We use infrastructure as code for golden host and golden image engineering is what that's called. Now this stuff gets real confusing and this stuff gets real complicated. All those good things. But this is, at the heart of everything we do at NoshaPoint. At NoshaPoint, we are really a DevSecOps shop. That's really what we are. And to kind of give you another idea, so infrastructure as code, here, this is where we have this Docker Hub item where I'm going to show you what this turns into. But security as code is where you have things like firewalls that live in containers, things like that. So that's kind of, and this is a Docker container. So we have a Docker container that contains cybersecurity tools and cybersecurity resources, and then you can build basically microservices. You can build a little Pi-hole microservice is what that's called. So if anyone knows what a microservice is, then you know a little more context into what I'm talking about. I won't go into microservice engineering right now. That, that's DevSecOps stuff too, when you're trying to develop and engineer services, very specific types of services. But you can create services with containers. You can build products, services, all kinds of stuff. So let's whiteboard a little bit. Let's just ask the question again. What is DevSecOps? And two things that are important about it. So basically the idea of DevSecOps is really simplified version of it all is test before you implement. Test before you implement. And then another concept that we care about is focus on development strategies, so I mean development strategies that are fast and efficient and basically reproducible, and better yet, I should just say focus on development strategies that are scalable. That's probably a better way to put it, is things that are scalable. So in things that you can automate and orchestrate, creating things that are continuous and will basically work for you ultimately is kind of the idea here. And then it's achieved with, so like if we could turn a computer into software, then it makes it easy if we turn a computer into software to make it easy to test. So infrastructure as code is important, and we can do this with things like Docker Hub, which is what I was kind of showing you. And then we can use Docker Hub to also save things like, not just Docker Hub, you can use GitHub. There's all kinds of things you can use to store code. But infrastructure as code is basically trying to simulate a computer so that you can kind of test a computer and how it's going to behave in a virtual or software instance, instead of having to, go and buy a new computer. So you don't want to buy a new computer every time you're trying to test something. You can create test environments that live in the form of software, and ways to spin that up. Infrastructure as code isn't necessarily the system that's running as, say, a container in Docker. Infrastructure as code is the saved item. Like, this is infrastructure as code. An image can be considered infrastructure as code. It's just basically, you could think of it as an alternative term is configuration management and automation. So imagine if you were to build technologies for enterprises and you work with hundreds of customers by the day. You don't want to have to wonder what's going to happen when you implement the software you just created on 100 accounts and hope that it works out. You want to be able to basically have a way to see what configurations are ideal, see what configurations are the best, test those configurations, and then save those configurations somewhere, and then basically use that to make sure that the software that you implement to your customers is going to do what you hope that it does. That's kind of the idea of that. And then we have the idea of security as code. And we could think of security as code like software firewalls. And a tool for anyone who's new to this stuff, who's trying to get into it, or even if you're not new to this stuff and you are a highly experienced veteran in the space of development and all those good things, and you're very senior level skills, if you have that, then still a very helpful and common tool that folks use is Docker. So you can basically use this tool called Docker to manage these things. And then this is where we can create essentially what's called a workflow. And so then the part that makes DevSecOps valuable is having a workflow. And so I'm just going to write that down. Workflow matters. I mean, the workflow is basically everything, so maybe that's not even a good way to put it. Just straight up, the workflow is the part in DevSecOps that matters most. So if we're thinking about like what matters most in DevSecOps, it's how you use it more or less, or your what we could consider, which I'm just going to draw like an equal sign. We could think of that as best practices. Or even strategies. I'll update this. So like best practices and strategies. So DevSecOps, you want to think about, okay, so before I implement this thing, how am I going to ensure that it does what I hope or expect it to do for the next year? And then if something happens to it, how am I going to react to it? How am I going to make it work again? How am I going to recover it? How am I going to make sure that it doesn't fall apart? Well, you have to define all of these things, and it's a real pain to people who aren't used to this. And some people, this is the thing that people tend to hate about DevSecOps. And then you just document everything always. In DevSecOps, I'm just going to straight up make a single pane whiteboard on this. In DevSecOps, literally, you just want to document everything. Documentation's maybe the most important thing in DevSecOps, because this is how you end up creating guides, manuals, all that stuff. So DevSecOps, whoever gets good at documentation tends to be the best at DevSecOps. So if you're good at documentation and you're good at writing, you'd probably be really good at DevSecOps. If you're a writer or a marketer and you so happen to know like how to build gaming computers, honestly, you can transfer those skills straight into DevSecOps if you're a writer and or a marketer and you have enough skill to build like a gaming computer or something. So for those of you gamers out there who know that stuff and market and write and blog and stuff, then you'd probably be real good at DevSecOps if that's something that you ever really wanted to do. So consider that. And then another thing about DevSecOps that really matters is how do we manage DevSecOps? How do we deliver it? Because this is something anyone can do. Anyone can do what we do. What I do is not unique or special. Whether or not I have more experience than other people or not, it doesn't really matter. It's just, are you able to help a person who needs your help at any given time? I'm only one person, so other people need to know this stuff too, so you can learn these DevSecOps skills and help more people too. So how do we manage and deliver DevSecOps? We use playbooks. So if I kind of make an example of a playbook, for DevSecOps, we use playbooks. Just because DevSecOps is kind of like, building with DevSecOps is kind of like playing football, I guess, or you could think of it as like rugby, but sports have plays. Even if we go and I pull up Google and type playbook and go to images, the first thing that pops up with playbook is a bunch of things that are either sports related or things that are trying to make sports analogies. And there's a reason why, they say IT playbook. That's DevOps stuff right there. DevOps, everyone, there you go. Now, I don't know this company, and I'm not advertising for this company. I'm just Googling random stuff. But likewise, if we're thinking about, right here they're showing what looks like a, soccer instead of football, but it still plays, right? DevSecOps works kind of like a sport. DevSecOps is a whole lot like a sport. I'm just going to say DevSecOps works like sports. I'm just going to say it. Let's just let that sink in for just a sec. It really does work like sports. So if you've played sports or watched sports that use plays of any sort, DevSecOps works like sports. And if you've played any sports video games, you definitely know that a lot of those games, they have the little play designs. So DevSecOps might be like, okay, so if I'm trying to build something, I might be like, okay, so I need to find a way to have an access point that multiple people connect to for a tournament, like a hacking tournament. If I want to make a hacking tournament for a whole bunch of people, the first thing I need is an access point for everyone to be connected to. So you just list things out. So what we're going to do is we're going to have this access point, and this access point is going to be what players connect to, but we need to have players if we're going to create a hacking tournament, right? And so we actually teach DevSecOps by teaching how to prepare for basically playing hacking games, or we teach it through role playing. That's how we teach it, because role plays, can you follow a play? If you can't follow a play, you probably can't do DevSecOps. And if you can't do DevSecOps, you probably won't really be able to work in cybersecurity on a technical job. So maybe don't get a technical job in cybersecurity if you try DevSecOps, decide you despise doing the technical stuff. And if you despise doing the writing and things like that, there are other jobs that are just as good. Like being an analyst is awesome too. You be an analyst and not do DevSecOps. But DevSecOps makes a good foundation because then you know how analysts get their tools and how the tools are built. So anyways, if we have an access point, we gotta then have players. So if I have to build an environment from an access point that lets me play with people, well then that creates a couple of things that I need to figure out. Do I get a router? Do I get so for everyone to connect to? How am I going to get everyone to connect to this? Well, our Olympiad platform can be used in multiple ways. It can either work with an access point, it can be used with a proxy, it can be used with cloud architectures, or you can actually use our Olympiad as a portable cloud that people can just connect to and use. because it's a cloud technology that lets you turn your home into a cloud. It lets you do cloud engineering where you can build things at home and then send them to the cloud, or at your business and send it to the cloud for DevSecOps, for cloud engineering. Or for that matter, you can build a cloud inside of the Olympiad and then have a portable cloud that you can take around that other people can actually literally connect to as access points. And then you can use that as a portable education tool or a field recon tool for field research or whatever you're trying to do. Who knows what you're trying to do with it. But anyways, we have to have players if we want to play a game. And actually I should just write what we're doing DevSecOps for, because I haven't done that. So we're imagining that we are so let me just put down like what the scenario is here, because I haven't really outlined that very well. So imagine we are engineering to host a hacking tournament. That's what we're doing. So we're going to have these players connect to this access point. Bam, bam. So in our DevSecOps here, we have to decide what's going to be reasonable for players to connect to. In this case, with my DevSecOps skills, if I'm going to host a tournament, say, for a small group at a small gathering, it might make sense for this access point to be a Raspberry Pi. Or if I'm going to be hosting this for a large enterprise business, it might make sense for me to do all of the setup on a Raspberry Pi, but then host the game and access point in the company's cloud. And so that's part of DevSecOps right there. Is for DevSecOps, you have to understand how to properly create an ecosystem that will accommodate all of the users. So this is really important, is in this case, players are the users. So no matter what you're doing with DevSecOps, you're building something that's probably most likely going to have users, depending on what you're building. Well, someone's got to use it, an administrator is a user. So players equal users. That's going to be very important. And so we want to think about who the audience is. And so we want to think about questions like, how many users need to be accommodated? And then we might ask questions like, is this a small gathering, or actually I'll just say, is this a private gathering or for a business? And, you know, it could be for a private training. It could be for a small group or a large group. We just really need to think about all of these things, and the art of understanding this stuff and doing the social engineering around this. The social engineering involved. The social engineering around deciding what hardware do we need to have present for this to be possible right here. We need to do some brainstorming. So then that brings us possibilities where we might say, Raspberry Pi company AWS cloud. There might be different things. So you might have a company AWS cloud that everyone has to access via some business router. Who knows? It really just depends on your audience. You have to know your audience to know what in the world you're making. You have to know your audience to know what in the world you're making. And so our access point could be, for a small group, simply just quite literally like just this. Just build a cloud inside this thing and then set it up, and everyone will see it as a Wi-Fi access point, and people can literally access it on their phones. And if you have an app that you developed for them to play a game, you can set up a game on here for everyone to host, to learn DevSecOps, and then have people connect to this device right here, and now they can use that while you teach them cybersecurity skills, or play hacking games for fun if you just enjoy playing hacking games. Some hacking games are pretty fun, actually. The one that we played actually turned out to be pretty fun. So we did make a hacking game, actually, on my YouTube channel. You can look through my YouTube channel and find it. And if you're in the Facebook group, it's in there too. But DevSecOps, it's the philosophy of understanding how to plan with technology. It's kind of how you think about it. So we create playbooks. And so in this case, making a playbook means that you are going to make the decisions on what's going to be exactly what everyone's going to use. And so then if you did decide to make the ultimate decision, you're like, okay, so let's just whiteboard everything real quick. Let's just map it all out. Be like, why are we using this? How are we going to use it? Who's going to use it? How much hardware do we need? And all of this needs to be decided on before just wasting a whole bunch of time and money. It's like if you have a big event, people can't just wing a big event. Everyone has to do big planning. DevSecOps is one of those things where you have to do a whole lot of planning. It's just how it works. You don't just randomly start doing DevSecOps. So we use the concept of playbooks where we just draw out and map everything, in which the playbook here, this might quite literally be the playbook. It might be this simple. Like, okay, so we need to build something that's going to do that. And then you just, list the technologies that everyone's going to use. And in this case, if you're just going to use the Olympiad, then there's not much else to write because the Olympiad's a very specific architecture. Now, if you are wondering what the Olympiad software looks like, it looks like this. And if we log in, and by the way, this user interface is called Portainer. As I fail logging in. So as we log in to our Olympiad, and this is a test environment that I've put together, so this is not my production ecosystem or anything of the sort. For anyone who doesn't know what you're looking at, I'm just kind of showing a high-level idea here. You just see what it looks like. Maybe I'll make a full-on thing explaining what goes on in the Olympiad sometime. But what the Olympiad does, for anyone who's used to using things like virtual machines, the Olympiad is designed to have you use containers like virtual machines. And so if we want to have a Linux terminal, then we can go log into a Docker container and basically have a Linux container. But if I want to play a hacking game, what if I wanted my Olympiad to be something that multiple people could connect to? Well, if I go back to this whole thing, if every one of these items that say Athena are little systems or little containers or virtual machine access points, however you want to think about it, that let other players come in, not only do people have the ability to connect to these little containers independently, but they can learn how to network from these little things and learn what's called lateral movement, learn what's called SSH, learn, networking, connecting to other systems remotely. And all of this is a contained ecosystem on an isolated network that lives inside of a Raspberry Pi. So this is an isolated, contained network that's just fully running inside of an engine called a Docker engine. And then the Olympiad also has a separate Kubernetes ecosystem called K3S. But this one that says Athena 0, this is the Olympiad's administrative container, which is basically this infrastructure right here. And anytime we need to recreate this infrastructure, and this is a pen testing toolbox, so anytime we need our pen testing toolbox, which I also use for generating threat intelligence information, then we can just generate this Athena 0. Now, if I wanted to teach someone how to use the pen testing tools in this pen testing toolbox and do that with a game, then I can just create user nodes, just like these little user hosts for people to connect to, and then I can create logins for them to, jump in here and then learn how to attack each other. And so I've set up logins to show you how I can actually hand a password and a login to a player. So I say, hey player, here's a URL. Take this URL. And DevSecOps is the process of me figuring out all the stuff to give everyone, figuring out exactly how it's all going to work. And me as the DevSecOps professional, I know how everything's going to work. I did all the documentation. I put the documentation and hand it to the player, say, hey player, here's how you log in, here's how you do this stuff. And then the player's like, oh sweet. So then the player comes in to log in. You handed them, as the DevSecOps professional, you gave them everything they need. And you make it easy for them. And you say, just type in this password and this username. So we're going to log into, maybe Athena 3. So maybe they want to log into this test node, Athena 3. And you give them the password and the login. They log in here and bam. You've set it up so that this player can't access anything but what you've assigned them. And so now you've created a game and a way for players to interact with each other through this game. And then they can come in here and be like, okay, so I'm going to learn how to hack these other players. So I have this one that says Athena 3. It's like, okay, so I'm going to teach you how to hack other players. So if Athena 3 is the computer that you're using, I've assigned you this little cloud computer. This cloud computer is living inside this tiny computer, but I'm going to teach you how to hack with this tiny little cloud computer. So the DevSecOps professional facilitates the game and administrates the game. And as a matter of fact, the DevSecOps professional can even monitor the game. And if I wanted to monitor the game, I could just go straight up to, there are different ways to monitor it. At a high level, I've created a real basic way to just kind of see what's going on. And we can come in here and we can see if there's been activity going on. We can see how many clients are being active on this right now. Right now, this shows that there's one client that's been active. And then we can come in here and while players are playing, let's say that a player's learning how to do an update. So player wants to learn how to do an update. Player's doing all this stuff, they're learning, they're figuring out some things, you've given them everything that they need to succeed, this little ecosystem, because you've delivered them this tool that they're now using to learn with. Then meanwhile you come over here and you can see, look, it now shows that there's two clients because now there's activity on another client. It said one client if you're paying attention. So if you go back in this video and look at what it said before, now I can see, oh, there's a client attached to this, and come over here. If I'm logged in, I can come and take a look at what all has been connecting, and oh, check it out. We have this user right here, this Athena 3 user who, we got some activity coming in. And as an admin, we've set it up to where we can make it easy to be like, okay, we can kind of identify if players are having trouble trying to connect to other players, or if they're having trouble even playing the game. If all the players are showing up but one, you might need to help that player get connected. And you can use this tool right here, DevSecOps. You developed this whole thing. You know how to help the players. You know how to monitor them. You know how to make sure that they're okay. And then this player's like, okay. So then you teach them, okay, well, what if you wanted to go and you're going to try to learn how to steal things from another system? You're going to learn some pen testing. This player's like, okay. So then you teach them how to connect from maybe Athena 3. This says Athena 3 real quick. Let's zoom in. Pay attention to where it says the name of the host I'm on. I'll highlight that. It says Athena 3. We're going to teach them how to connect to another system. If we want to connect to another system, we might say SSH pi at Athena 1. Why not? And the user might not yet know certain things, and then they try to log in, and it fails, and they try again, and it fails again, and let's give it a sec, they try something else. But interestingly enough, now they have an opportunity to learn in this environment that you've created for them how to properly do these things and how to troubleshoot it on their own in a way that's fun. And so then now all of a sudden this player has learned the lesson that you were hopefully trying to teach them, because DevSecOps is the process of coming up with what you're delivering to your audience. DevSecOps is the process of knowing how to deliver what you're trying to deliver to your audience and then building it for them. I mean, that's one way to put it anyways. It's a little more complicated, but if you know how to talk to people, listen to their problems, or listen to what they're trying to accomplish, or whatever they're trying to do, and then you develop that thing and then deliver it to them, especially when we're talking about continuous services for, like, you know, IT operations for operations. Well, a game, we're simulating operations here. That's what we're doing. So we're simulating continuous operations. And then a good way to learn DevSecOps is to learn how to set up a game for people and host it. So if you can set up a game and host it for folks, you can do DevSecOps. If you want to learn how to do DevSecOps, that's what the Pi'd Hacker Experience is for. The Pi'd Hacker Experience is pretty much all DevSecOps. It's a DevSecOps workshop. And what I mean by DevSecOps is it gives playbooks and in role plays, and you have to take these role plays with the playbooks and make it through the playbook. If you can't make it through the playbook, then you just need more practice. Once you can get through a playbook and a role play, and the Pi'd Hacker Experience walks you through all of the knowledge that you need to do these things, the foundation, the context. It gives you the end-to-end understanding. It's a 2-month program, so it takes, to my experience, about 2 months to learn DevSecOps decently. And so we've created a 2-month program that's self-paced. You can do it. I haven't seen anyone do it faster than a month, but I've seen some take longer than 2 months to do the Pi'd Hacker Experience in its early forms, and now it generally seems to take about 2 months for folks to get through the Pi'd Hacker Experience, which is generally in line with my experience and how long does it take to kind of teach someone DevSecOps. You just have to deliver the information in a format that works for people. And so that's what we do, is we do DevSecOps to deliver whatever we deliver. And then we teach others how to do the same thing so that they can produce products and services themselves. And then if you want to get a job with those skills, awesome. If you want to build your own products and services and own your own business with those skills, then that's also awesome. If you already run a business and you just want to drastically drive down the cost of your operations with this sort of technology, depending on what you do, if this is the sort of thing that's appropriate for your existing operations, then this will probably make your life a lot easier. And so, because we teach people how to make your business more efficient, drive your your spendings down for development, because development's obscenely expensive. Barely anyone can afford to do it. And so we're trying to make that more affordable. And so we make development more affordable and skill building more affordable by just teaching everyone DevSecOps. You can do DevSecOps, then you can do analytics, you can do everything else. And if you want to go from being an analyst to a senior, you need to know DevSecOps anyways, because you need to know how to develop the tools for the security operations that everyone uses. So there you have it. Now you know a whole lot more about DevSecOps. You know what a golden host or golden image is anyways. You can Google that again if you're interested in more of that. You've taken a look at the Olympiad, and you've seen some good things. You've seen some very good things. So anyways, I just want to thank everyone for watching this, who's watched this, and now you know what DevSecOps is.